The sun stood high over the small frontier town, bright enough to turn every roof into a mirror and every window into a pale square of light. Dust hung in the air like a curtain, and every step pressed another soft print into the ground. People drifted toward the open square because that was where the talk had led them, and talk in a town like this traveled faster than any horse. The baker came, brushing flour from his sleeves. The blacksmith came, wiping his hands on a rag. Children came, trying to stand on tiptoe for a better view. They did not fully understand what they were seeing, but they knew it was something the adults could not ignore. At the center of the square, a small group of traders stood near a makeshift stand. They had a rough sign and a ledger book on a crate, as though a piece of paper could turn a wrong situation into a fair one. The crowd pressed in, but not too close. People whispered instead of speaking out loud. Some looked down at their boots. Some folded their arms and stared straight ahead as if the scene might change if they showed no expression. But the scene did not change. The woman at the center of it stood tall. She was from the Apache people, and she carried herself with quiet care, as if she would not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her bend. Her hair was braided and caught strands of sunlight, and her eyes did not dart. They held steady, like two calm pools refusing to spill. The air around her felt still even with the noise of the square. She did not ask for pity. She did not bow. She simply stood, her chin level, her gaze set somewhere past the crowd, as if she could see a line of mountains waiting on the horizon. People told themselves many stories to make sense of what was in front of them. They said, "It is not our place," and "This is how things are done," and "Someone else will step in." They looked at the ledger book and the crate and the shirts of the men who held the book and tried to name the scene as business. But under their words there was a knot in the air, a sense that something was not right. In the second row of the crowd stood a cattleman, a quiet man who had made a life by knowing water in dry country and grass in short seasons. He wore a jacket patched at the elbows. He kept his hat low and his hands calm. He had learned over years of wind and sun that most strong talk solved little. He watched the woman, not the ledger. He watched the way she stood, and he tried to imagine the road that had brought her to this square. He did not need every detail to know that the road had been long and hard, and that it was still not over. The auction-style sale began with a voice that tried to sound official. The man with the ledger called out numbers as if the sound of a price could make a person into a thing. People shifted on their feet. A few made half steps forward and then back. A man at the edge of the circle made a light joke and then fell silent, ashamed. Everyone could feel the weight of the moment and no one wanted to carry it. The cattleman did not speak yet. He watched the sun slide across the edge of the sign. He watched a ribbon of dust rise and fall as a wagon rolled past the far corner of the square. He heard the soft sound of the woman's breath, and he decided that she had already had enough of other people's voices spoken over her. He guessed what the crowd was likely to think of anyone who stepped forward. He had seen how quickly stories form when people are afraid of their own silence. He did not like the story that was forming here. The first small bids came, not from people who wanted to help, but from people who wanted to be seen making a move. Each time the ledger man nodded sharply and called a new number. The crowd reacted with little gasps, little clicks of tongues. It felt as if the square itself had become a stage for a play that no one should be acting in. A stray dog lay down by the well, as dogs do when they do not understand humans but can feel their unrest. Then the cattleman stepped forward. He did not make a speech. He did not look for anyone's approval. He set his jaw, and when the ledger man called for the next bid, he named a sum that startled the square into a hush. He offered 2 fine mares and what would equal a season's profits from his spring cattle drive. People turned to stare. Some blinked. Some frowned in surprise. The ledger man's voice caught for a moment, then found its rhythm and called the bid to the crowd, but no one answered with anything higher. Whispers rose like wind through dry grass. Why would a man pay so much? Why would he part with 2 mares of that quality? What did he plan to do? The whispers did not stop at questions. They dashed ahead to answers, then to judgments. Someone near the bakery door shook his head and muttered that only a hard heart would pay that price. Another person crossed her arms and decided without any proof that the man must have dark plans. When people do not like a scene, it seems easier to cast blame at a face than at a whole system. And a face is what they had. A quiet cattleman who had just given the highest offer. The ledger man wrote the numbers in his book. He closed the cover with a small thud. The moment felt final, like a door shut in a hallway. The cattleman took the paper he was handed, but he did not look at it. He tucked it away as if it did not matter much to him. Then he took off his jacket and placed it lightly around the Apache woman's shoulders. Because the wind had turned and the air had cooled, it was a small gesture, but it made some people look down, embarrassed by their own inaction. The cattleman spoke in a calm, low tone, words only she could hear. No one knew what he said, and no one ever would, because he would tell no one, and she had no interest in satisfying curiosity. They walked from the square together, not close, but side by side with respect between them. He led a spare horse, one of the mares he had not offered, and he kept the pace easy. The woman did not stumble. Her steps were sure. People watched them pass and made up fresh stories as if the act of inventing could make them feel less uneasy. A few tried to raise a cheer, but it died quickly, because they could not decide if this was a moment to praise or a moment to fear. Most stayed quiet and returned to their routines, though their routines felt thin and their bread tasted plain, and their ironwork seemed heavy in their hands. At the edge of town, the cattleman paused at the general store and bought bread, dried fruit, and a small tin cup. He added a blanket of tight weave. He did not ask the storekeeper for credit. He counted out the coins and gave a small nod. The storekeeper glanced at the woman, then at the cattleman, and then away. He did not ask questions. He had known the cattleman for years, and he had never seen him rush toward trouble or turn his back on someone who needed a quiet kindness. They took the North Road, which was not the road most travelers used when they wanted speed. The North Road ran close to a line of low hills and crossed several washes that only held water after rain. The cattleman knew those washes could guide or confuse depending on the day. He did not try to guide the woman. He pointed instead to the hills and made a small circle in the air with his hand, as if to ask whether she preferred the slopes or the flats. She glanced at the sky at the angle of shade and then inclined her head toward the slopes. It was a simple exchange, but it carried more respect than many long speeches. As they walked, the wind lifted and fell. The air smelled of sage and dry earth. A small hawk wrote circles overhead, and a pair of jackrabbits paused and then darted into a patch of shadow. The woman kept her eyes on the land and on the light. Every few steps she seemed to mark a feature in her mind. A line of stones, a small bend in the grass, a notch in a ridge. The cattleman noticed this and felt the tightness in his chest ease just a little. Here was a person who knew the ground better than any map. Here was someone whose presence asked for cooperation, not control. Back in town, people returned to their work, but the square did not feel the same. The baker kneaded dough in a steady rhythm but kept glancing at the door, as if expecting a new report to walk in. The blacksmith lifted a shoe to a horse's hoof and paused, staring at the curve of iron as if it might offer an answer. The man who had muttered near the bakery door rehearsed his own words in his mind and found them empty. People do not often like to admit it, but many understand a brave act when they see it, even if they will not name it out loud. As the afternoon moved forward, the story in town changed with each teller. One version said the cattleman had acted out of pride. Another claimed he wanted attention. Another went darker and tried to guess at harm. But anyone who had truly watched the moment, the jacket placed around the woman's shoulders, the careful way the two walked out of the square, found it hard to match that calm kindness with any dark plan. Still, because certainty is a comfort, some clung to their first opinions. On the North Road, the two travelers kept a steady pace. The cattleman did not hurry. He knew that a simple plan done with patience often beat a complex plan done in panic. When they reached a stand of cottonwoods, he stopped and shared bread and water. He set the tin cup down and stepped back so she could take what she needed without pressure. She ate slowly. Neither of them spoke much, and yet something passed between them. A small agreement that silence could be a friend. When they resumed walking, their steps matched more easily. Morning came soft and clear, with a pale gold light spreading over the hills and filling the low places with shine. The cattleman and the Apache woman rose from their resting place, shook the dust from the blanket, and packed the little they carried. The air was cool enough to wake the mind and gentle enough to ease tight muscles. They shared dried fruit and a small drink of water, then stepped onto the slope where the trail curved behind a line of scrub. The day felt like a page they could write on, and they moved with quiet purpose. They did not rush. The cattlemen kept an easy pace to save their strength and the horses, but there was a firmness in his steps, a clear plan in the way he chose solid ground and steady shade. The woman walked a little ahead when the trail narrowed, sometimes pausing to read the land as a person reads a familiar book. She noticed faint marks where a rabbit had paused, the tilt of grass that suggested a light wind had blown through at dawn, the gently darker color of the dirt where water had run a few days earlier. None of this would help most people, but to her it was a map that fed her mind with direction. Around midday they reached a small ridge where they could look back without being seen. The town was only a memory now, a cluster of roofs in a square that had faded into the distance. The cattleman took a slow breath. He did not feel lighter because he had escaped any trouble. He felt lighter because the woman's steps were free, and that was the only measure that mattered. He pointed to the ridge running northward, and the woman gave a brief nod. It was the right route, longer, yes, but safer, winding through higher ground and thin groves of trees that could hide them from open view. They stopped by a narrow stream that ran shallow and clear. The cattleman refilled the tin cup and offered it. The woman, in return, pointed to some glossy leaves and a handful of small seeds nearby. She tapped her chest, then traced a circle in the air, as if to say the seeds were good for keeping energy smooth. He understood and smiled, surprised by how easily they had learned to share knowledge without many words. Safe in their small shade, they rested, then set out again before the afternoon heat grew strong. In the early afternoon, the air shifted. The woman lifted her hand to pause him and tilted her head. They both listened. Far off, like a whisper under the wind, came a faint sound. Perhaps a set of hooves, perhaps a cart, perhaps only a stone rolling in a dry bed. It was nothing certain, only the sense that the land behind them had stirred. The cattleman met her eyes. He did not want to trouble her with worry, and he did not want to pretend there was no reason to be careful. She looked toward a narrow cut in the hills, a place where the ground dropped and a careful walker could pass without leaving much trace. She moved that way and he followed, leading the horse with a light hand, making sure every step was sure and quiet. The cut in the hills became a small valley, with rock walls that kept the wind still and made every small sound clear. The woman glanced at the ground and then at the wall, where a line of shadow formed a clean stripe. She motioned for the cattleman to walk where the shadow fell. In shadow, the soft dust would hold fewer marks, and the light would not catch the shine of the horse's shoes. The cattleman had never thought about such details, but he learned fast because the lesson was plain and kind. He nodded, and they moved forward like that for a long stretch, letting the land help them. They reached a fork where the valley split in two. One path went toward a gentle slope dotted with small trees. The other curved through a patch of stones that jutted up like broken teeth. The cattleman would have chosen the gentler slope. It looked easier. But the woman touched her own hand to show small scrapes and then pointed to his boots and the horse's hooves as if to say, "We can take a few scratches. The stone will break sound. The stone will confuse a follower." He understood. They went into the rocks, moving slowly, placing each foot with care. The horse trusted the cattleman's calm and lifted its feet neatly over uneven ground. By late afternoon, the light had lost its sharp edge. The sky softened into a blue that promised a quiet evening. They stopped near a small patch of willow where a pool of water hid under thin branches. Here they rested again, and the woman's face brightened. She spoke a name, soft and sure. A name for a ridge farther on where her people sometimes passed. She pointed to the line of hills that ran like a backbone across the horizon. The cattleman repeated the name, careful to get the sounds right. She smiled. It was the first time all day she had smiled for more than a moment. In that smile, he saw not only hope, but also a kind of direction that could not be measured on any map. They made a small fire at dusk, just enough to warm bread and soften some dried meat. The woman took a little piece of charcoal from the edge and drew a simple map on the sand. A line for the ridge, a circle for a spring, an X for the place where the land fell away into a shallow bowl that could hide them if they needed it. The cattleman studied it like a student learning letters for the first time. When the little map had done its work, she brushed it away, smoothing the earth with her palm until there was no sign left behind. They rested, taking turns again. The stars returned one by one like old friends. The cattleman watched a shooting light streak across the dark and made a quiet wish that did not need words. He trusted the woman's sense of the land, and he trusted that doing one good act with care would lead to another. When his turn to sleep came, He slept well because he had chosen a clear path and his heart did not carry confusion. Dawn arrived with bird song and the soft glow of pink and gold. They moved early, following the line of the ridge at a gentle angle. The woman found a path that curved behind wind-carved rocks and tall grass. From time to time she would stop, kneel, and touch the ground, feeling for the faint language of tracks, a deer that passed in the night, a fox that stepped lightly near a patch of brush, a set of small footprints that belonged to a child from days before. She read all of it without fear, only with care and attention. The cattleman became quiet in a new way. His silence was not only a lack of words, but a space where her knowledge could be heard. Near midday, they came upon a flat where the earth widened into a gentle plain. Far off, a thin line of smoke rose from a place beyond the next set of hills. The woman looked long at the smoke. It did not signal danger. It signaled life, a cooking fire perhaps, or a warming fire for elders. Her gaze softened again, and she took a longer breath than before, like a person who can finally trust the air. She turned to the cattleman and spoke a few clear words in her language, then a few in his. She said that her people might be close. She said there was a careful way to approach. He nodded and kept his hands easy, his posture open. He would follow her lead. They moved along a shallow curve that kept them out of direct sight while bringing them closer. The woman found a small rise where they could stop and wait. She took a small mirror from a pouch, held it flat, and lifted it just enough to catch the sun and send a brief flash toward the far hill. It was not a wild beacon, not a shout of light, only a tiny hello, a whisper across distance, a sign that a friend was near. They waited. The cattleman watched the air and the hills and tried to feel what the woman felt, the hum of a place that belonged to her long before any ledger or crate tried to claim her. After a few quiet minutes, a shape appeared on the horizon, a rider, then another, both moving with calm control. Not in a rush, not with heavy hands, simply with care. The woman stood and lifted her hand, palm outward, a sign of peace. The riders slowed. They did not race forward. They watched and measured as one does in a world where careful choices keep people safe. When they were close enough to see faces, the woman spoke, steady and strong. The cattleman stepped back, giving her space to speak for herself. He kept the horse still and the reins loose. He did not reach for anything. He did not act as if this meeting were about him. Words flowed between the woman and the riders like a stream that had known its course for years. The riders' faces grew warm, then relieved, then quietly bright. The woman's name was spoken with care. The cattleman heard gratitude in a language he did not fully understand, and gratitude needs no translation. One rider dismounted and offered the woman a small pouch of clean water. Another rider nodded to the cattleman, a gesture that was both greeting and thanks. The cattleman returned the nod, his eyes kind. They walked together toward the hidden camp. The path curved through brush and across a dry wash, then opened to a gentle bowl where a few shelters stood, low and well placed against the wind. Children played quietly with a set of painted stones. Elders sat near the fire, their hands moving through simple tasks with grace. When the woman entered the camp, heads lifted. A small rush of soft voices rose, not loud but full. She moved to an elder and touched her hands to the elder's hands, and there was a moment in which the world seemed to hold its breath. A circle closed. A person returned to the place where her name was anchored.